I am Joel. Welcome to It's About DM Time. Tonight we've got a great panel with us. We have Grace from D&D Beyond, and we've got Anthony and Josie from a Short Quest Long Rest podcast. And finally, Josh from Lone Colossus Games. Tonight we're going to be chatting about being a new Dungeon Master. Some of the pitfalls and experiences and whatever wisdom that we can share. And I'm hoping that we can kind of dispel some of the myths of being a new DM and maybe make it a little less frightening. So the first question would be, when you were starting, were there any particular resources that you were like, yep, thank goodness for that book, thank goodness for that app or that website? Anything in particular that you felt like that was the thing you needed the most?
Aside from making certain that you know the player's handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide very thoroughly, if you've ever done dance, if you've ever done music, if you've ever done art, you know that without the basic fundamentals, you really don't have a foundation to really explore going out on your own for some stuff. You know, some DMs, like, they'll start off making custom worlds right off the bat, and they do just fine, and they do amazingly. For most, I say the foundations. As for third-party content, the blog, the monsters know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that one, the author, what he'll wind up doing is he'll take any monster off the shelf from the official books. He'll do slimes, he'll do kobolds, he'll do, elementals and the like. And he'll look at their stat blocks. And he's not just looking for, like, okay, what is this monster's strengths and weaknesses? He's looking for how would they behave based on their attacks, based on how wise they are, how intelligent they are, charismatic. What are the strategies they're going to employ? So how are your characters, your players, going to encounter them in the environment? Absolutely changed how I approach running encounters. My predators are predators. They are going to stalk you for several sessions, waiting for one of you to be off on your own, or injured, isolated from the rest of the group before they hit you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bought the book version of that. And it's, I remember showing it to my players, and they got a little scared when they saw that book. Anyone else? Was there a resource that you felt was essential to your foundation as a DM?
I was going to say, Joel, your Lexicon is pretty sweet.
Oh.
To be honest with you.
Thank you.
I need to check it out.
So
I didn't even pay her to say that.
Well, no, he did not pay me to say that.
He's like, now, also, here's $5. Thank you for mentioning it.
Yeah, maybe you should. But it really just upped my creativity in, like, verbal storytelling. I'm fairly confident in writing, but no one wants to read scripts. Like, that's not what this is about, right? It's supposed to be really collaborative, and thinking about word choice much more intentionally, I think, changed my confidence. Might not have changed my, like, technical ability in DMing, but that was something that I felt just, like, calmed the nerves a little bit,
What resource did you find was really important?
So starting in 4th edition was kind of earlier on, before a lot of things kind of started getting collected up. The best resource I had online for during that point in time was just the D&D 4E wiki. It was kind of hard because 4E came out with so many books, and then there was the Dragon magazine that it was coming out with that had additional articles and such. So it felt like it was almost impossible to keep up with everything. That's why I really prefer 5E for this thing I'm going to mention. D&D Beyond, let's be real, we all know what D&D Beyond is and what it does, all the resources that are on it. They're phenomenal as 5E, just tools and resources to use for both official, Unearthed Arcana, and on D&D Beyond, there's actually some really interesting homebrews on there that people can check out.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at the world of, because, there is the pre-written side of things and then the homebrew side of things. And I tend to kind of walk the line on those two, where there are things where I'm like, something's missing here. I just want to grab a little bit from here and put it in there, just to spice things up. I think I've found for myself that as much as I played in a group, that reading I think it was the starter kit, The Lost Minds of Fandalver, that once one of my boys had that book, and I just started to read through just to kind of figure out the structure of, so how does a map and how do you set up this situation? How do you read through a map and all the development areas and all that kind of stuff? I found that I had to kind of go through that in order to get an idea of what is the structure for an encounter, a story, how do we get from beginning, middle to end, etc. And that one was really quite easy to digest. That was one. And then the other thing for me would be the player's handbook, that getting to know characters. To me, the character is that's the pillar of the whole thing, is how do you build a character. And of course, you can go beyond the player's handbook, but that's where it all starts.
One thing that I would add to that, I think, so we mentioned the DMG and the PHP, and I think no one's mentioned the Monster Manual, and I would kind of agree with that. If you've played 5th edition enough, DMG has a very solid guideline on how to make monsters. And since I had played a lot before I got to 5th edition, I literally basically didn't use the Monster Manual for the first 2 years that I played 5th edition. Wow. I just made all my own stuff. Going back and trying to use it again after that, it was it was an interesting experience, but it was also kind of like, I clearly didn't need this. It's useful for inspiration. It's nice to see what they did. It's also nice to see that, hey, the DMG has these guidelines. Oh, the Monster Manual doesn't follow those at all. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. And then the other resource, I hate referring to people as resources, but I don't feel like it falls under the next question. So have someone at the table know all of the rules, right? It doesn't have to be the GM, but if it's not the GM, then someone should know 90% of the rules, so that if you're ever confused, you can ask them for clarification. If you do something wrong, be open to them saying, hey, this is how it should work, because I know some groups are totally open to having rules be, wrong or be, misinterpreted or whatever. But some players are definitely going to be like, that doesn't feel right because this person's feels like they're getting away with something.
Yeah, definitely having a person that would be like your mentor. I think that goes back to Grace's point earlier. I know that I've had one friend who is the DM for when I was kind of learning how to play, that even in the middle of a session that I was DMing for, I would be texting him, hey, how do I do this? Can so-and-so, this class, this race, can so-and-so do this? And he would get back to me right away and figure it out. The other alternative to that is, it's okay if I find it's okay if everyone at your table knows the rules kind of equally, and if there's kind of an understanding that we're not always gonna get it right, and yes, we can take a moment to kind of flip through books or look up online and figure it out. And ideally, hopefully, you've got a group of people that even when the ruling goes against their favor, that they're like, yep, that makes sense.
Adding to that, one thing that I did starting off as a DM and that I still do today when I play in person is I have physical copies of the books that I will slide across the table to people who are whose turns are not immediately coming up.
Right.
And I will be, okay, you need to look up this rule for me. You need to look up this spell for me. Hey, can you look up this monster stat block while I prep this other stuff? That applies a lot to helping new DMs not get overwhelmed. and is a very, very sneaky way to teach your players the rules because you're making them look them up and not just being the sole source of them.
I'm gonna steal that. That's great.
Yeah, that is a wonderful idea.
Scott Kobold commented, which is something I super identify with, like new in this endeavor, is that the rule of cool trumps all, as long as everybody's good and on board with that. So like I would rather, as long as it makes sense and it's not like breaking anything, if you want to try it, you know, let's see what happens.
Sure. Narration and kind of those movie moments are, I mean, that's so much of the joy of the game right there, right? The story that you get to play out together. Would you say we're gonna go a little, maybe even a little smaller here? What would be, you know, not just a book of resource, but like the thing that you're like, oh man, thank goodness I have this. You know, and I guess go beyond dice, or is there something that you made or that you bought that when you got to use it in your game, you were seriously excited to do that?
Mine's neither a thing I made or bought, but actually a player. I'm super thankful that he is around and has been in my campaign. He is in my Theros campaign. He is an amazing note taker to the point where he can condense the entire session we've written into quick little bullet point notes, because I've seen the notes he does if he's doing quick notes, but if he's doing full notes, it could be like 2, 3, 4 pages worth of notes. And he is actually the person I turn to for like, okay, did I forget something? Can you do the recap before a session and such? He is an amazing person. I'm thankful for him every session that he is a part of, because he will remind me of stuff that I've forgotten, because I'm trying to, you know, flesh out the world and everything and continue with these players. And he'll just be like, that wasn't that NPC's name. I was like, thank you. That was this person.
Yeah, thank goodness for note takers, right? I one of the groups I run has 2 note takers. These guys are thorough, and man, that makes such a huge difference.
On the topic of note taking a little, because I do a podcast, we're able to listen back on our episodes, so it's not as essential there. But for my IRL games, I reward inspiration for note taking. It'll literally be like after the session, like write down 3 or 4 sentences, pass them on to me. You'll have inspiration to start of the next game. And what that winds up doing is, you know, when they're just having a quick, when you're quickly condensing what's stuck in the player's mind for that session, you as the DM are getting an idea of what they find most interesting. Like, what are they most engaged with? What's stuck in their head the most?
Yeah, I was gonna say for like things, I wouldn't say this is essential by any means. I mean, you can use a piece of paper for initiative, but there is, I think it's like a Pathfinder initiative tracker that is sold as. Basically, it's like magnets that have wet erase that you can write in, and you can move the magnets to like mark, okay, are they holding an action? Are they delaying? What are they doing? And then you can kind of have your whole list, right there. And you can always swap things around if you need to. You don't have to erase anything, which is really nice. It just kept the same, all the player characters are written in. I never erased their name for the entire campaign. So I don't have to write out the list every time. I just write down the number. So that was something that was useful, but certainly not necessary. And another thing that I saw from chat that Scott Kobold put in there, music. If you don't know, maybe when you're not your first couple of sessions, don't worry about it too much. But when you have time, when you get really inspired, especially for boss fights, if you can manage to time the music out, like he said, or if you can just find something that's fitting, that doesn't sound awful to listen to and repeat for an hour. So I'll design boss encounters to have phase 1 theme, phase 2 theme, and even phase 3 theme, right? And maybe even like a little transition music with a cutscene or something. But I think music can add a lot to the game.
When we transitioned to online play, my players within a few weeks just said, the thing I miss the most is the music. Having that music, ambiance, and for that one.
Yeah, so I was going to say that for anyone playing online, if you're on Discord, the Rhythm Bot, they actually have two of them now. So you have two in the same server. So you have one for like ambient stuff and then one for music if you want to have both going at the same time. So you have battle music and like, you know, thunderstorm sounds or whatever.
On the topic of soundtracks for your games, for those who aren't familiar with video games, like I'm sure a lot of us here in the panel are, but if you're coming to D&D and you haven't really touched that sphere, many video game soundtracks, in fact, most of them are designed to be played on a loop. So just looking for some of the most popular games, or even just looking like, hey, what games have the best soundtracks? That's how you're going to identify some of those really niche titles where, hey, the gameplay wasn't that great. It's not that memorable. It's an older title, but the soundtrack is dope, and I'm going to use it for my games. Additionally, if you're worried about streaming music for, say, a stream, YouTube has massive libraries of music that you will not get dinged for copyright-wise.
Okay.
It's literally just out there, free use for people to, hunt for titles that really stick to with them.
There's actually a YouTube channel I use, so shout out to this gentleman, Michael Gelfi. He has an entire YouTube channel that is just dedicated to copyright-free music that he makes and produces. And he says the only thing he asks is to be given credit in your stream, your YouTube, whatever content you're using his music for. He makes amazing background music and things like that. I've been trying to see if I can find a really good combat theme. That's the only thing he doesn't have quite. Is he's got a lot of really good ambient sounds, but not as many good combat sounds.
If I were to think about one thing that I found super handy, I'm a bit of a forgetful person. And so I would always forget when, that person is concentrating or that character is prone, or prone is easy with a mini. You can just put it outside. Or like deafened or whatever conditions. I end up on Amazon finding like condition rings that you can put around the mini. And man, that made such a huge difference because my brain just could not keep track of all those things. And once again, I'm not much of a note taker, so yeah.
Yeah, we use that. I'm in one real life campaign right now, which is Rime of the Frost Maiden, Icewind Dale, and my DM has this nice little like wood box that's filled with those kind of rings. So like I'm playing a blade singer in there, so I'm like concentrating on different spells. I'm hasting myself. We have a barbarian, so they've got a raging token.
Yeah.
Things like that, and it's phenomenal just to be able to remind ourselves like, oh, this is what's the effects that are going on.
Yeah, and there's like super cheap alternatives for that kind of thing too. Like
you have a 3D printer. There's a whole host of them you can print.
Yeah.
They don't take too long.
Yeah. Moving on, because the idea of being a DM is a little bit of an overwhelming concept to some people. Like, I have to read how many books, and I have to do how much prep. So how do you avoid being overwhelmed? I think, Grace, you had said you just enjoy doing all that prep. And so have you found it overwhelming at all when you're doing it?
I find DMing during games being pretty overwhelming still to some degree. I mean, so I have some anxiety issues which don't help contributing to that, right? But yeah, I feel like a lot of us do. But I find that actually doing some of the prep helps mitigate because I feel more prepared. If it goes off the rails, which it inevitably does, at least I have ways and things that I know we can weave in later on, reference later on. Like, I just feel more comfortable kind of going into it. I think So I put out a tweet when I first started doing this, like, hey DMs, how do I get started? And it was the most engagement I had ever gotten on Twitter. It got like retweeted, I don't know, 500 times or something stupid. And everyone basically said, just try it. Like, get with people that are forgiving, that are your friends, that won't care, that can help you. And just the first session, get it under your belt. It's not matter. It doesn't matter if it doesn't go great. Everyone's going to have fun. You're with your friends. So I'd just say do like a one shot to try, get that kind of the big nerves out, and then put some time into your first prep session. Maybe you end up not prepping that much ever again, but then you know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I know for myself, I like over prepared for my first few sessions. I would not just, I could have just tagged pages in the monster manual, but I went online and like reprinted stat blocks. So I had them on my pages and, really easy to, there you go. Nice.
Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
I had everything printed off.
Monsters.
Totally. Yeah. Like I got one of those back there somewhere. And I think one of my first sessions was really just, the story was as simple as, I made all the players be half orcs. That was one thing. So I really had to only get to know one race. They could pick their class though. And the story was, things have been stolen by another orc tribe. You need to get them back. There you go. And that was a 3-hour session where we were all kind of getting to know how to do it. And I had way more notes for that than I do for any session now, kind of thing. So yeah, preparation definitely helps lower the anxiety and lower the feeling of being overwhelmed. What about any of you? How do you avoid being overwhelmed when you were DMing?
The way that I deal with it is by over preparing. At least when I'm running a campaign, if I over prepare enough in the right way, then all of the prep that I've done for, let's say I'm like, okay, I know they're going to this place. I need to have some stuff prepared along the way. I need to have some sort of prepared there. I want to know what the overarching, arc is going to be. I want to know what's happening in the world. And so I prepare all of this stuff. My entire GMing philosophy is to prepare enough that I'm ready to improvise. Mm-hmm. And so I do a lot of over preparation. 1 week, I spend 4 or 6 hours planning one session or 3 sessions all at once, right? And then inevitably the players are like, oh yeah, we're going to do all this other stuff. I'm like, okay, great. All of this prepping that I just did this weekend is going to last me for 2 months. Yeah. I'm set. I can do barely anything for the next 2 months. And then, it'll come up again. I'm like, oh crap, I haven't done anything for a while. I guess I should probably plan some stuff. That came.
Yeah. I often think that, you and looking through, let's say, a pre-written campaign helps you to see this a little bit, where they'll say if the players do this, then this happens. If they do this, then this happens. And I remember that got me into thinking I need to think of a whole bunch of possibilities here. You think the players are going to do A, but you should have some idea of what B, C, and D, and maybe even E, F, G are, so that you've got something in place there for that.
And depending on, how familiar you are with everything, how, I think when I started out GMing, I actually went and prepped all of that stuff as if they were going to do it. And now I would never do that. That's way too much work, right? You plan what you think they're going to do, what you're, 80% sure they're going to do. And when they inevitably do something that you're not sure, or you're sure they weren't going to do, you at least have an idea of how, people are going to react. If you have personalities for NPCs ready, then you know how to act as those NPCs. You can just do stuff on the fly.
Yeah.
And improv all of it.
So I think one of the things, because I also, Grace, have anxiety, and the biggest thing that I had to learn being a new DM is don't crawl inside your own head. If you over prepare, you're going to psych yourself out. If you under prepare, you're going to psych yourself out. You got to find that comfortable sweet spot, and for everyone it's different. Some people, like, they're comfortable with knowing every detail that's going to happen. Others, they'll show up and like glance at the book and cool, let's go. Finding your place on that spectrum is absolutely crucial for handling anxiety. And as I was saying before, being able to tap your other players for resources is going to make your job, a new DM's job, just so much easier. Whether it is, again, sliding a book of rules or spells over to somebody and saying, hey, look this up. Whether it is handing a blank sheet of paper to somebody who maybe you have an artist in your group and you're like, I'm going to describe a location and I need you to draw a map for me. Whether it is like, oh, so your character, you have the scholar background. Well, I'll pay you a little extra gold on the side if you're chronicling their adventures. Find things that make your job easier and get everyone involved in some way that appeals to them and also feels tied into their character, and it will help them feel much more tied into the world.
I really like that idea of delegating. And I think that goes back to a point that I often bring up. This is a cooperative game. As the Dungeon Master, you are wearing so many hats. You are the referee and the narrator and the plotter, but you are also a player. And you are part of the group playing the game. And so the idea, like, sure, I might have all the resources, but they're not just, some of them are just for me. But other ones, I love that idea of like, okay, you check this out and you check this out, and almost making that something to be a little more conscientious of as the DM, because you want your players to learn too, right? As opposed to rulings kind of coming down from high being almost arbitrary to a player, that they can get to know how to find something in the book so that they can solve a problem before they even have it. I think that's a very good piece of advice.
The delegation side of it came from when I was first being trained. I was certified as an EMS responder, and one of the first things that they teach you when you're, and that you might even learn this in just a CPR class, is if you tell a crowd, hey, I need you to call 911, no one's going to call 911.
Yeah.
Or the people that do, they're not going to be as detailed with it as they would be if you picked someone in that crowd and went, you are responsible for this person's life, go call 911. Go give the details of our location, go tell, whoever answers the phone, what's going on.
Yeah.
And you just extend that to less critical situations like D&D, and you'll do fine.
And we got some good advice coming through the chat as well. Double Crit Fail reminds us that don't worry about messing up. You're going to mess up. You might have to even retcon some things. You say, hey, that thing that happened a couple of rounds ago, actually, this is how it should go. I know with my players, I've said, I totally messed that up. We're going to keep that the way it was, but from now on, it's going to go like this. And we're all going to mess up. And I also like what Scott is saying, that DMs need to find their style. It takes a little bit of time, and you might be a DM that loves, social encounters, but maybe you're not as comfortable with combat, and you might kind of steer things a little bit more that way. That's okay too. And once again, you are a player as well. You are there to also have fun. I want to start to wrap up the conversation with the question of, my players are going off script. They're doing what I didn't think they were going to do. What do I do? What do you do in that situation? Story-wise, when your players don't take that hook, or when they don't react to an NPC the way that you're hoping or expecting, do you get things back on track, or how do you do it?
You panic.
Okay, good advice.
No.
If it's like your first session, I think this might be a little controversial. I'm going to say it's kind of okay to say, guys, I don't know. If we're doing that, I don't know. And kind of railroad a little bit, which I know like everyone wants to avoid at all costs, but if you're really trying to see, one, if you like this, two, not have to improvise a whole 3-hour story that you might be unprepared for, I think it's okay, and hopefully your friends are cool with that. Like they'll go along with you. Not to say you need to do that the whole time, but like if they deny the quest giver, then it's like,
Yeah.
what happens,
For a situation like that, that's what makes having a veteran at the table just so critical for sometimes for some new DMs, is you can tap them to be that person who's like, hey, I need you to kind of co-DM, but not co-DM. Here's the module. Can you take a glance at the first chapter and like help us kind of like stay in this ballpark so I have an easier time easing into this, new world?
Yeah, if your group has the benefit of having more than one DM, then absolutely have that person that's kind of almost your anchor that can help you to stay on track, for sure. Anthony or Josh, anything you would add to that?
I have a bunch of chaos goblins in my campaign, and what I do, and this actually goes back to prep because I didn't get to comment on this. What I do with prep is I make about like 4 outlines per session. I'm like, all right, like right now, for instance, they're in the underworld in Theros. Do I expect them to go the way I want them to? Absolutely not. So I have about 5 different ways that they can go, and I'm like, all right, is there any other way that they can go? No? Okay, they're still going to find out something. They're going to somehow like sink the boat or something. Like, I have a bunch of chaos goblins that I never know what they're going to do, and I hope that they go along with the story I'm telling in some way, shape, or form, but you can never expect. No plan survives meeting the players, is really what I have learned. And I just let them go. If they start being like, you know what, we're done with the underworld, we're gonna go back to the world of living. I was like, okay, there's about like 4 months worth of planning that I've gone. Time to get rid of that thread and that hook, and you know what? Let's go start on another one. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you just have to kind of go with it. I definitely agree with Grace in that there's no harm in saying, hey, you know what, especially as a new DM, and your players are hopefully going to know that. It's not like you'd be hiding that from them. Hey, you know what, like, I'm not ready for that. I'm not prepped for that. I've got all this ready, but I don't have anything for that. And ideally, you'd want to, if you, in a moment of panic, I could see how this wouldn't happen, but ideally, you'd almost want to find a story way to kind of steer them back in that direction kind of thing. But transparency is, I think, really key.
On that note, there's 2 different ways you can do this. One, you can say, okay, cool. You want to do that? Great. We're going to wrap the session here. I know we've only been playing for half an hour. I'm going to prepare this for next week, and we're just going to play a board game now or something. The other way you can do it is if you want, if you're like, okay, look, I don't have this prepared. If you want to keep playing, we're going to do it this way. But if you want, I don't have any reasons that you couldn't do that, but why don't you all come up with something that is why you can't do that, right?
Like,
to just give the players control of, why they're not doing what the players decided they were going to do, right? One of my favorite things to use is skill challenges. I've made 2 videos on how I run them and different variants for them. And they're just a great way to give players control over things while also saying, this is the goal. At the end of the skill challenge, you're going to be here, or you're going to have done this thing. And now how do you do this? How bad does it go for you? But regardless of how you do that, this is going to be the outcome. So if you're like, okay, I need this thing to happen, you can plan in your notes to say, okay, we're going to do a skill challenge for this. And then you tell the players, okay, yeah, you're trying to get out of the castle. All right, cool. Skill challenge time. And then you run that. And by the time you're done, they're out of the castle. However they did it, And you don't have to worry necessarily too much when you're planning how they're going to do it. You just say, yeah, this is going to happen. It's going to be some skill rolls. And then if they fail, this is how, this is what happens then. Maybe they lose a bunch of hit dice. Maybe they take some damage. Maybe they, whatever makes sense for your story. But regardless, you know that they're going to get where they're going. Obviously, that doesn't work for everything, but it's a decent way to start planning things.
I think one of the greatest gifts that players can give a new DM, or even a veteran DM, doesn't matter how long you've been playing, is self-initiation of roleplay. If the players on their own are talking to each other in character, hands off. Let them do their thing. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. If they're interacting with each other, let them play out a scene. It could be absolutely something completely ridiculous, but the point of the game, we're all here to have fun. Pay attention to anyone that's not involved in that scene. Make sure that they get a little bit of screen time. Down the road, maybe have something prepared for them, or be like, hey, so while these guys were doing this thing for the last 5 or 10 minutes, what has your character been up to? And those little moments are just, they feel good as a DM because, that player is invested.
Mm-hmm.
They're so invested that they are living that character to that where they don't need you to put anything in front of them to be that person. It also is a gift to you as the DM because you're off to the side here like, we're going to get a little bit of prep work done because I did not have anything planned for that.
My biggest tip as a DM is, especially if you have, a group of people who, like me, they like to steer off in other directions because they like the whims of change. They're just like, this sounds fun. I always ask them, is this what your character would do, or is this what you want to do? That is the big thing of how I've managed to steer some story beats back on track, because I have a player. I love him to death. He's one of my best friends in real life. He is very much a wishy-washy, this sounds fun now. And I've had to steer him on track more than a few times. It's just like, your character would not want to not go there. Your character absolutely would want to go there.
I was going to say, I think another thing that you can do for your players and that they can do for you is, and I've seen this advice floating around a little bit on the Twitter sphere and the like, reduce the number of roles that your players do to each other. Deception, persuasion, attack rolls, etc. If you have a party that is going to be engaging with one another, make it purely narrative. If two people are arguing, ask both of their players, okay, so which character wins this argument? Is this a situation where you want your character to lose this argument because you feel it would advance something in their personal story? Or, hey, this character is drunk, he's being aggressive, he's being belligerent, he's talking like he's going to pick a fight with you. All right, guys, do you guys get into a fight? Who lands the first punch? Narrate the scene for me. What does it look like when the two of you are scrapping on the floor? If it is a point where they both disagree about the outcomes, there's this really, really cool thing you can take from the Game of Thrones roleplay game where they turn social encounters into essentially combat encounters where each player states a goal that they want to have happen at the end of that interaction, and then they make their rolls.
Oh, actually is really cool.
Where it's, all right, I want to persuade him to see my point of view so that we can continue on with this adventure and go into the Dragon's Lair. Or the other person might be, I want to persuade this person so that we get the hell out of here because everyone else is feeling really nervous about this and I don't want anyone to die. Okay, well, if neither of you can come to an agreement in the narrative, let's have you roll off. Let's do a skill challenge between the pair of you to see who ultimately wins this exchange, and then we act as if that was the only thing that happened.
When it comes to the end of the game, the session is over. Do you do any kind of a post-session self-reflection? I know for myself, it's a lot of like, oh, I forgot this. Or, oh, I could have made that so much better. Or, how am I going to get them next time? That kind of thing. Is there part of you that... I know that as a teacher, when I was learning to be a teacher, self-reflection after teaching a lesson was integral to things getting better. And so do you have any kind of self-reflection routine for yourself, or, advice for a new DM?
My biggest thing that I'll say is, and I actually have a friend of mine who's kind of going through this a little bit too, even though we've been in a 2-year campaign. He feels bad about this. If you feel like you're running behind on the schedule that you made for yourself, don't. You will have as much time as the campaign needs. Don't feel like you have to stick to a set schedule. Like, let's say you're running, like, I actually haven't done a whole lot of printed modules. I take inspiration from them, but let's say you're doing like Storm King's Thunder, and you're supposed to be at the town where the hill giants attack, but y'all been playing for 4 months and y'all still haven't gotten there. Or like you're in Icewind Dale, or you still haven't left the first town that you were a part of, and you've been playing for months or weeks or whatever. Don't feel bad for that, because a good combination of why this is happening is maybe your players are super involved in role play and they're making the sessions last longer because of things like that, or maybe they're wanting to explore the area around it, and that is also taking up time. Don't feel like you have to stick to some arbitrary schedule you made. As long as things are progressing perfectly fine, and as long as you feel like things are going perfectly fine, let it run its course. You will get there eventually. You will tell the story that you have in mind. It will take the time it needs to.
Yeah, I think so. I have two things to add to that. One is an example. The campaign that I just wrapped up, there was a point where I was like, yeah, I think I got like 2 to 3 sessions left. Kind of depends on what they do. Literally took like 9 or 10 sessions after that point to actually finish that campaign, because they went off and did a couple of things, or it just took longer to do certain things, and that was totally fine. The other thing is, I think if you have this timeline, you're like, we should have been here like 3 months ago. I'm getting impatient. I think it's totally okay to just say, okay, players, we're like 10% of the way through this campaign. I thought it was going to take us 2 years, but we're in like 4 months, and I don't want it to take 40 months. So can we make a commitment to start moving forward on things on this, or do you want to just scrap the campaign and we'll just make it a little adventure around this little area that we're in? Do you like this too much? And just kind of get a feel for that. Obviously, if you want to run that campaign, then that's a different conversation. You just be like, yeah, I don't want to scrap this, so can we try to move it forward?
Yeah, don't be afraid to run on your own timeline. Let the players role play, and actually, it's quite glorious when you realize, as the DM, like, I haven't said anything for like 25 minutes. And this is still fun. The characters, the players are all having fun. Sure, why not? Kind of thing. Yeah, let things happen as they do. As long as everyone is enjoying it, then you're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On a more micro level too, Joel, there are things that I think you have to reflect on if it's something you want to get better at, right? Like you said, it's like best practice in learning anything to reflect. That's when you actually like solidify your learning, not just doing doesn't actually make you better at anything. So I've noticed my first couple of sessions, I would intentionally say something that I thought would be helpful, like a little clue or a piece of narrative that helped move things forward, but it just was way confusing and threw people off. So like you learn, okay, I need to say this differently, or I need to describe this in a different way in the future or next time, or you know what I mean? Like storytelling, when you're involving others, takes on this life that you don't see on static paper. And so like figuring out how to be intentional with your words, I think was a big thing that I'm still learning and working on. The other piece that I would say is learning to choose what types of adventures, so that you end up enjoying the prep and you end up digging into the story a lot more and it's more fun for you. Like the very first adventure I ran, I didn't love, and I was like, oh, this is cool, I'm just gonna do it. And then the second one I did, I influenced it a lot more, kind of like took pieces and co-wrote, and it was like a billion times more fun. So I think reflecting on what pieces you enjoy and what types of stories you want to tell makes the journey a lot more fun.
Yeah, all good advice. We covered some really important points here tonight. And I want to thank all of you for sharing your experiences, whether they are new or long-time experiences, because I think they're all important. Hopefully we painted DMing as not a scary thing for new DMs. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, all of you. And have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks.
See ya.
See ya.